Welcome back. My guests are India's former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Oman and the UAE, Talmiz Ahmed, former additional secretary in charge of RNAW, Jaidev Ranade, the editor of Nai Dunya and a former MP, Shahid Siddiqui, Akali Dal MP and BJP ally, Naresh Gujral, and Binju Datta Dal MP, Jay Panda. Mr. Ranade, this month alone, perhaps as many as 12 young Indian men have been deported from the UAE for either sharing ISIS propaganda or seeking to join ISIS. Is this a worrying development that proves that in small but growing numbers Indians are being attracted and drawn to ISIS, or can it be explained away in some sense?
It is a worrying phenomenon, especially when we recall that one of the key recruiters for the ISIS was a young techie in Bangalore. Now we have this. They're all educated youngsters who are sort of getting attracted by ISIS, as are many others around the world who are also getting drawn to the ISIS philosophy. So I think it is a worrying trend. ISIS is also, let's not forget, cash rich. They're pumping a lot of money in wherever it suits their purpose. And they do see a situation in India which they can exploit.
So this also means that the earlier confidence with which we used to say Indians are not attracted by ideological, extremist, fundamentalist beliefs is no longer true. We are as vulnerable, or increasingly as vulnerable, as anyone else.
Well, yes, I'd go with the second part of your comment, that I think the problem is still not that, it's not that large. Given the population of Muslims that we have, the numbers who have been, if I may use a technical word, infected by the ISIS ideology is still very small. But yes, it could grow, and what we are seeing is a tendency for growth in India.
Shahid Siddiqui, would you say that equally worrying are reports that there are young Muslims in Kerala like Riaz who are acting as recruiting agents? Earlier, there was a gentleman called Mehdi Masroor Biswas who ran something called Shami website, the Shami Witness website, and he played very much the same sort of recruiting role. Does it worry you that the net, which is not so easy to monitor, is proving to be a way of luring people to ISIS and attracting them to fundamentalist and extremist ideologies?
Karan, I am worried for quite some time, but let's neither overplay it nor underplay the threat, because both ways we help the ISIS if we overplay the threat. Secondly, most of these young boys who have been caught have been caught in Dubai or in Gulf or in other countries. In India, a few individuals. So that is also a point we should take note of, because in India it is not still able to influence even few individuals. And thirdly, we must understand that in India, Shia-Sunni issue is not an important issue, and Indian Muslims, by and large, both Shias and Sunnis, let the media not turn it into a Shia-Sunni thing. Indian Muslims are against ISIS as per se. They are totally against the ideology of ISIS. And fourthly, I will say ISIS has peaked. Its influence on youth all over the world, which was there till about 6 months back, has peaked, and now it is coming down, because all over, all sects of Muslims have realized that it is more a threat to Islam than to anybody else, and therefore every Muslim should stand up against that. So we must take notice of it, but major, we should not overplay it.
Talmiz Ahmed, I want to pick up on a particular point made there in that answer by Shahid Siddiqui, and it's to do with the UAE, where you are speaking to us from. Can you answer the question, why and how does the UAE seem to have emerged as a hub for Indians either seeking to propagate or join ISIS?
I don't think this is a hub. I think the overwhelming majority of people from the Arab world who have joined ISIS are from Saudi Arabia, not from the UAE. I don't think anyone has gone from here. What happens here is, it's important to note, the Emiratis monitor the email traffic very, very carefully. And the moment they get a hint that people are accessing forbidden sites, they become suspicious and they take action. Their entire effort is preventive. I do not see this region as a hub. I do not see an overwhelming majority of Muslims being attracted to the propaganda of the ISIS. I think you should focus more on the West in this regard. You have several thousand, more than 20 or 30,000 Westerners who have joined the ISIS, and they have come from UK and from several parts of Europe. That is where you have a real problem, not with regard to South Asia or with regard to Indians particularly.
Naresh Gujral, last year in September, when he was speaking to the International Institute of Strategic Studies in London, the former National Security Advisor M.K. Narayanan said that there was no authorized figure for the number of Indians involved with ISIS. But then he added, and I'm quoting him, the figure could be more, but it's clearly not less than 100 or 150. At that time, a year ago, most people in India thought Mr. Narayana's wrong, maybe he was exaggerating. Today, many feel he's very close to correct. Would you agree?
Karan, even then the number is minuscule. Many more have gone from the UK, from France, from other European countries. So I wouldn't say that the number is worrying. Yes, we have to ensure that the number comes down and does not start to go up. But as the figures stand, I am not overly concerned.
Can I put it like this? Two things are happening. One, the number is increasing. It began, if you remember, with the first four found in Khar, one of whom, Abdul Majid, has come back. Then we discovered people from Hyderabad and people from Calcutta going. Now we're discovering a whole spate of others who are going. So A, the number is increasing even if it's small. And secondly, when things are increasing, small numbers over a period of time become big numbers. Are we therefore, in your eyes, Naresh Gujral, spotting a trend that is worrying and which we need to act about now? Because if we don't, it could become quite large thereafter.
Well, currently the numbers are in double digits. Now for a country India's size, where the Muslim population is more than 150 million, I don't think we should say that the numbers are really worrying. But yes, we must take steps so that this trend is arrested.
Jayapanda, alongside the numbers, there's also the question of, how should I put it, the quality of the people who are being attracted to ISIS. Now, Mr. Narayanan, in that lecture to the International Institute of Strategic Studies, said, and I'm quoting him, they are professionals, they are not the oppressed or the suppressed. What he pointed out is that the people being attracted to ISIS were engineers, accountants, and degree holders. Does that surprise you?
Not really, because if you look at the precursor of ISIS, which was Al-Qaeda, going back even to the 90s and even a dozen years ago, the kind of recruits it attracted from Pakistan and other parts of the world were middle-class people. And for the first time, this category of youngsters who were also educated and many of them tech-savvy were getting attracted to terrorist organization. So I think ISIS has taken that a step further in that it has proved to be far more successful to recruit through the internet, through WhatsApp groups, with very little overhead of its own. Just a couple of recruiters have been identified in India who have got so many as perhaps 40 or 50 interested. So it's not surprising. We should recognize that ISIS is perhaps the most worrisome terrorist threat around the globe today as it has emerged in the past 3 years. We should also be concerned about the growing numbers in India. But finally, I echo the other panelists that we are still at a very early stage compared to the much larger numbers of recruits from other countries, which means we have a window of opportunity today to do some things right to nip this in the bud. And I see signs that we are doing some things right, which I will discuss as we go along in this program.
Let me bring you in, Mr. Ranade, on this very interesting discussion we're having about how do we assess the numbers involved. There is a view that's been given to us by Tilmiz Ahmed and also by Naresh Gujral that if you look at the overall size of India's population, the size of India's Muslim community, which is now pretty close to 170 million, If it's 100, 150, it's a minuscule number, it doesn't matter. On the other hand, there is a view that has been echoed in a sense just now by Jay Panda, that it's small but growing. We have a window of opportunity to act, and obviously when windows are open, they don't stay open for too long. Which is the way you'd look at it as someone who's handled this at raw? Small, minuscule, and therefore not of pressing concern, or small but steadily growing, and remember, little acorns lead eventually to huge big oak trees. Are we at that stage?
I think we are still in a preliminary stage, but there's no doubt that the numbers are growing. What I would point to is not just the numbers in India of the ISIS, or the number of Indians who've been lured by the ISIS and joined them, but the real worry is those who go there, get trained, and then possibly return. What can they do? What is the kind of havoc that they can create? Would they become centers for setting up other modules here? I think that is the worry of the agencies today.
Therefore, what you're saying is that even though the numbers are small, the capacity for this small number to actually become proliferators, particularly when they return and spread, is much greater, and that's another reason to worry.
That is certainly a reason to worry.
So the conclusion I would come to is that although it's small and only a fraction of the Indian population, the potential for this small number to grow and become worrying is there, and we mustn't ignore that potential.
Yes, I would stress the potential and that we should not ignore it.
Talmiz Ahmed, I want to draw your attention to something else that Mr. M.K. Narayanan said in that lecture to the International Institute of Strategic Studies. He said, the new version of jihad is proving to be highly attractive because of its spiritual purity. He added, it's not attracting on a basis of exclusion, but on the basis of its appeal, and that appeal was spiritual purity, and that's why he says it's a cause of concern.
I find it very difficult to agree with this evaluation. In all my studies, I have not come across the allure of spiritual purity at all being a factor. You must be aware that several people who have gone across have very rudimentary knowledge of Islam. One of them had taken the book Islam for Dummies as his guide. So let us not get carried away and exaggerate this business of spiritual purity. I think it is completely wrong, and it is a baseless assertion. I have not seen any evidence of it in all my studies.
This is a very important point, Shahid Siddiqui. I want to bring you in and get your opinion, because as a journalist, you have your ear to the ground. You probably also have a feel for what the young are attracted by. Do you accept Mr. Narayanan's argument that the appeal is an appeal of spiritual purity, not a response to being excluded? Talmiz Ahmed clearly thinks that is rubbish. What's your opinion about it?
I agree with Talmiz. You know, we have been talking of madrasas. It is not the madrasas which are creating these so-called terrorists. It is this semi-educated Muslims. I am calling them semi-educated because they are not educated on Islam. They may be engineers, they may be doctors, they may be anything, but on Islam, they know, their knowledge is very rudimentary, and they are being influenced, as we saw with Naxalites in our young age. The best of the students were becoming Naxalites. It is this class, middle class, which goes to this kind of romantic.
But can I interrupt you then?
Organization.
Can I interrupt you? Because when you compare the sort of Muslims being attracted to ISIS with the generation that 20 years ago was attracted to the Naxal movement, what you're forgetting is that in both cases, it was an ideological attraction based upon something of belief. And that's what I suppose Mr. Narayanan means when he says it's the spiritual purity of the Islam that's attracting, just as it was the left ideals that were attracting young Naxals.
Those Karan, who were ideologically influenced by Marxism, did not go to Naxals. It was who had very rudimentary understanding of Naxal Marxism. They went to Naxal movement and gradually moved away from it. And same is happening. I mean, these are two very different things and different situations. I'm not comparing them, but I'm just pointing out that it is these young boys, semi-educated. But I also agree that even a figure of 500 is really very, very, it's not good. We are not talking of 10,000, 20,000 people, even 1,000, 2,000 is bad. But this battle has to be fought on ideological level. Yes,
quite right.
It's not spiritual, but ideological level.
I'll come to how the battle is fought in a moment's time. We've got a problem with your line. I'm going to go to another guest. Hopefully my colleagues will fix that line. It's not working terribly well. Before I come to my two politicians, I want to come back to this issue of spiritual purity and the appeal of it. You see, if young Indians 20 years ago were attracted by the purity of the Nakshal belief, that it showed a way of resolving the discrepancies and disputes of society, is it not possible that people that Shahid Siddiqui calls semi-educated, because they're educated as engineers, not in the religious field, would also be attracted by the purity or the alleged purity of the ISIS appeal, because it offers to them, in their belief, a solution to what they think are the problems they face? Therefore, would you rubbish the appeal of spiritual purity the way both Talmiz and Shahid Siddiqui are rubbishing it, or would you say there's a lot there that we need to pay attention to?
I wouldn't call it spiritual purity at all. In fact, what I would say is that the youth who are getting enticed by the ISIS, they are being motivated not only by the sophisticated propaganda put out by ISIS, but also probably feelings of being excluded from the mainstream, of some kind of discrimination that they have been subjected to, or imagined multiple factors. I don't think it's that. And by the way, as far as Naxalism is concerned, there was also a romanticism involved with that, which I don't sense here.
Well, romanticism could be simply a reflection of the fact of commitment and seeing this as a purer form of living. Yes. If they see this as a purer form of living, that could be a romantic belief in a different way.
Well, yes, here people have gone to the field, but they've also come out pretty soon.
Naresh Gujral, in this context, and this is where I want to bring in my two politicians on the panel, in this context, there is a view that the love jihad campaigns and the Ghar Wapsi campaigns of the VHP, the Bajrang Dal, even of assorted BJP MPs, are creating an environment that can only push young Muslims further into the arms of ISIS and further into the arms of radical, extremist, fundamental ideologies. Do you agree with that viewpoint? That the environment love jihad and Ghar Wapsi creates is the wrong one?
Well, Karan, the fundamental question is, how do we look at our minorities? We have seen this happening in Punjab. You would recall that after 84, how every Sikh was viewed with suspicion. So I think there's a broader question of how do we view our minorities, and especially the Muslims. Are we going to look at them with suspicion all the time? Is the majority going to always look at them as disruptionists? Are we going to give them a place in society? Today, if you look at the figures, unfortunately, the figures don't speak very well. You look at the figures in the IFS, 1.8% Muslims are in the IFS. Only 4% are in the IAS. Hardly 4.5% in the police services. Less than 5% in the railway services. We have to give them a place in society. Look at the education. The literacy rate amongst Muslims is 59% as compared to 65% for all India. Now these are the issues that we have to debate. How quickly and how soon do we give them a place in society?
So what you are saying in effect is that we mustn't forget that because Muslims are amongst the poorest sections of our population, the least educated, and in political terms the least represented, they are also therefore the most vulnerable to the appeals of fundamentalist and extremist ideologies. And if we don't act to improve their employment, to improve their representation, to improve their education standards, we leave them vulnerable.
Not just that, Karan, I think 70 years down the line, the time has now come to revisit our reservation policy. We have to have reservation with the economic criteria in view. The poorest of the poor have to be taken care of. We have been too long catering to certain castes and
Quite right.
the so-called OBCs who have now got a vested interest in this whole reservation system, I think we need to divert it from there.
And therefore, what you're saying in court is that we need to find a way of extending those reservations to Muslims who are amongst the poorest of our population, the least educated and the least representative. And that's the way of tackling this problem. But let me put to you, Jay Panda, in a sense, the question that Naresh didn't fully answer, and I can understand why he is, after all, a BJP ally. Do you think that Mr. Modi and Mr. Rajnath Singh realize that the VHP Bajrang Dang allies they have, or some of their own BJP MPs, are not just playing with fire in terms of sparking communal tension at home when they promote Ghar Wapsi and love jihad, but they're also unwittingly furthering the cause of ISIS and who knows, even possibly Al-Qaeda, because you're creating people who would then feel attracted to these movements because they feel they no longer belong at home, they're being pushed away.
I think we must see this in the context. There's been a lot of explanation as to why the appeal is not religion, but in all this analysis we keep forgetting the actual words used by ISIS and their recruiters, which is actually in the name of religion. Now I think my co-panelists are quite right that these people are illiterate in their own religion, but the fact remains that their appeal actually explicitly refers to religion. Now that doesn't mean that disenfranchisement also does not contribute to it. And let me answer your question in that light. Look, there is no Ghar Wapsi in America, there is no love jihad in Australia, and yet these countries are yielding very large numbers of recruits to ISIS. So we must see this in the bigger light. Yes, there are fringe elements in India from both extremes, from the right, the left, religious, non-religious, and they certainly all contribute to it, just as disenfranchisement does, like my friend and colleague Naresh Gujral was pointing out. But we often lose sight of the most glaring fact staring at us, which is that the appeal is religious. And in this context, I want to say one last thing. I'm never in favor of the fatwa issuing crowd, but we must recognize and appreciate that the Indian Muslim fraternity has recently issued a fatwa against ISIS, and I think that must be applauded because it needs to be tackled by weaning away these impressionable youngsters from what they believe is some kind of religious purity, which, as my co-panelists are pointing out, is perhaps far from the truth.
Mr. Ranade, recently the Indian government has stepped in to stop Indian Muslims sending groups to Iraq to fight ISIS on the grounds that they fear that that could bring back to this country the sort of Sunni-Shia divide that ISIS seeks to promote and is promoting in the Middle East, particularly in Iraq. Do you believe that was the right response to the Indian government, that this is the best way of protecting ourselves against any import of that problem?
Well, I think it was a good step, well thought out, because if our youngsters go to fight battles in foreign lands against a foreign adversary, they're obviously taking part in some kind of a conflict abroad, a conflict between different sects or a conflict between one group and another group, and they are likely to bring it back here. If they don't bring it back, it is likely to accentuate differences in India. So I think it's a good method of trying to keep things calm.
Very quickly, can I get your opinion on that, Talmiz Ahmed? You're an Indian Muslim, deeply rooted in this country, but you're living at the moment in the UAE. Do you believe the government was right to stop Shia organizations in India sending groups to Iraq to take on and fight ISIS on the grounds that this would create a potential for those problems, the Shia-Sunni problems, to come to India where they don't exist at the moment?
Yes, I fully support the affidavit that was submitted. I agree with the points made in the affidavit. There were concerns relating to the further radicalization of the groups. There were concerns about sectarianism, and they had also equated this initiative with a sort of terrorism. I agree with all the points made in the affidavit, and I think it was very laudable. That effort made by a small group of people to go out and fight with this bravado was completely misguided and should not have been allowed at all.
Shahid Siddiqui, let's start with the problem of deprivation. I'm talking of employment, I'm talking of education, I'm talking also of the sense of discrimination that many Muslims feel. That, many believe, is the basis on which perhaps some could be attracted to ISIS, to other Islamic fundamentalist ideologies. As a journalist who works with the community, what would your advice to Mr. Modi be to tackle these points of deprivation?
Karan, let's not again exaggerate the whole thing, because Indian Muslims have faced this deprivation all along. We have faced a lot of communal riots, huge communal riots, but in spite of that, none of Indian Muslims have ever supported Kashmiri militancy or have gone to Kashmir to fight with the militants in Kashmir. That has not happened. So, and I believe that that will not happen, and that is not happening by and large in India. Few individuals you can find in any community, any group, anywhere, who are madcaps, who can go in any way. But secondly, of course, there need to be educational and economic empowerment of Muslims, not because of the threat of ISIS, but because Indian Muslims are as much part of India and as much part of India's growth story and as anyone else. And if they are marginalized, then of course they will have no option but to take up to crimes and to other areas. But I'm so happy that in spite of, in 70 years, I have not seen it. I have visited most of the communal riot areas. I have not found a single Muslim who says that because of the killings of my family, I will support Pakistan, or I want to go to Pakistan, or I want to support terrorism. Nowhere I have come across. I'm honestly telling you that I have not seen. So it's a different kind of situation, and we must understand that this battle has to be fought mainly by Muslims. It is not a spiritual fight, it's a religious fight. And in this religious fight, because Islam has been hijacked by some of these organizations, Muslims have to stand up, and there we need the support of the government to Muslim organizations, Muslim groups, Muslim liberals. They must fight within their community, within their groups, and that they are doing anyway. But the government and the media should support that.
Talmiz Ahmed, let me bring you in on that point. Do you see this simply as an ideological fight where you need Muslim liberals, Muslim Democrats to stand up and speak the name of the true Islam to oppose the ISIS version? Or do you think this is something where the government also has a role to play? In other words, is it to be done and fought only within the Muslim community, or is it to be done with the government stepping in?
I want to make a distinction between the legitimate grievances that Muslims might have within the country and the allure of global jihad. They're two completely different things. I mean, we may have Indian Muslims like various other communities in our country who have certain grievances, who feel that the national cake does not include them, there are discrimination against them, there are loose remarks made on a daily basis. But this does not constitute the basis for their being attracted to global jihad. Global jihad is a very different thing, and which is why you have found over the last 25 years, where you have had global jihad, Al-Qaeda and more recently the Islamic State, you have not found Indian Muslims being attracted. This has surprised Zawahiri and has surprised Mr. Baghdadi, but they are astonished that the Indian Muslim is not attracted to jihad, and they are making special efforts in this regard. But we have to address the issue of the domestic concerns. They are legitimate. A communal discourse has now emerged very robustly in our country. It is something that should be condemned, and it is something that we must do something about. Almost on a daily basis, you find somebody or the other saying something seriously stupid, and it is given extraordinary, coverage in our television. That is a matter of concern, but I don't think it will still take people to global jihad, but it will create discord within our community as such.
Let me then bring you in, Naresh Gujral, because you're a very important ally of the BJP, and more than anyone else on this panel, Mr. Modi will be listening to you rather than anyone else. Both Shahid Siddiqui and Talmiz Ahmed believe that the deprivation and the inequality that they face in India is not going to drive Indian Muslims to jihad or to ISIS, and Shahid Siddiqui pointed out it hasn't driven them even to support Kashmiri militancy, which is within our borders. Nonetheless, there is that problem of discrimination and of inequality. What would you suggest to Mr. Modi to tackle it? Because the one thing you can never guarantee is that if it isn't tackled, it could become a ferment that leads and pushes people towards jihad, even if that's not happening today. So what advice would you give Mr. Modi about tackling that discrimination and inequality?
Hesitation in saying that there has to be more tolerance as far as the majority is concerned. There is a fringe in every society. There is a fringe even in the parivar, and I think, and I've said it before also publicly, that fringe needs to be tamed. Strict action needs to be taken whenever they make such, I would call them stupid statements, which only cause problems in the country, and I think that's where the leadership has to assert.
But beyond curbing the fringe, which is essential, are there special administrative, economic and other measures that must be taken focused, say, primarily at deprived Muslims?
Goes without saying. As I said earlier, their education level, their health care, providing jobs for them, we must bring them in the national mainstream. Right now, I'm afraid they are not part of the national mainstream as far as these areas are concerned. I've just given you figures to show how they are not getting their rightful place in society, and I think it's high time we address these issues.
My last question to you, Naresh Gural, do you really believe Mr. Modi will do that? Because the rhetoric and the ideological positioning of the BJP is not to take special measures to help special groups. Yet what you're saying is that's precisely what's needed. So will he do it?
If there is no harmony in the country, Make in India will be a pipe dream. The jobs that we have promised will never come. We need harmony. And if we do not take these steps, we will not have harmony.
I'm going to bring you in on this one before I come to Jaydev Ranade, Jay Panda. Do you think there's also now a need for Mr. Modi to perhaps be approached by leaders like you who are not opposed to the BJP, you're not on the Congress side of the divide, you're somewhere in the middle, so that he feels and he's given an opportunity to understand the special measures for Muslims to tackle their deprivation would not be a U-turn by him, it would not be somehow a betrayal of earlier positions he's taken, because the one thing that holds politicians up is the prestige. They can't go back on their sacred words, and that becomes a stumbling block. Does he need to be approached by people like you to help him do what Naresh is saying he has to do?
I don't think the Prime Minister needs any help in communicating. I think he is the preeminent communicator, certainly in a generation. And I would point out, Karan, that on several occasions the Prime Minister has come out and spoken very strongly, both in Parliament and outside to the nation, against some of these fringe elements and in favor of communal harmony. I agree with you that I think he needs to do it more often. I have certainly said so many times. I'm saying so now on your show. Yes, certainly he can do that, but also many of his other senior colleagues could also help in and speak out along with him. That would help mainstream the dialogue rather than leaving it to fringe elements. But there are other things that need to be done. You know, there are those who have claimed to represent Muslims politically for many decades who have actually done them some of the most disservice by helping to perpetuate some of the conditions that hold them back. And that dialogue needs to come center stage as well. We've already discussed about perhaps economic criteria for helping those who are not helped by the system to be included. And I'm not talking only about Muslims. There's a whole dialogue going on about reservations, etc. And finally, I would say there are signs of some change in attitude in dealing specifically with the ISIS threat. I refer specifically to a decision that seems to have been reported in the media, that the government is deciding not to knee-jerk arrest anybody that is wanting to head out to the Middle East to fight for jihad, but to try to deprogram them, decondition them, which is the approach that other countries like Germany and others are also beginning to follow.
Mr. Ranade, you're in the business professionally of looking at situations, not just analyzing them in terms of how they seem today, but also seeing where they're leading to and how they'll develop. As you look at the situation we've discussed, are you satisfied that we have a good grip on it as a government and as a society? and therefore what looks as if it's small will stay small? Or do you worry that the trends, ghar wapsi, love jihad, the attitude that the BJP sometimes adopts to Muslims when it says no special measures for special communities, means that actually we won't tackle it, and what is small could become worryingly big? Which of the two is your analysis?
Well, it's a two-pronged answer that you're going to get from you. One is, I think that Prime Minister Modi's agenda of development should actually be an inclusive agenda, which I presume it is. He wants the nation to move forward. You can't leave aside a large chunk of the population if that's your agenda.
Does he need to take special measures for that chunk?
Well, he has to try and mainstream them, and as the
Naresh was very clear
yes,
that special measures are needed.
Absolutely. Education, health, that's where I might disagree with him is making reservations for them in government services. I would rather that they are given a lot of incentives to join the top colleges, the top universities, and mainstream themselves. Not why only the government. It could be even in the top private sector fields. That's where I would expect
So as someone who's been at RNAW and has looked at crystal balls and said this is a situation that's developing, which way is it developing? Is it developing towards something that becomes increasingly more worrying? Or do you say to yourself, no, we've got a firm grip and actually it's developing in the right direction?
I would say that it's manageable, but we have to pay attention to certain signs that are beginning to show, including, as I see often on posters in J&K, there's a very small thing, maybe 5 or 6 people who are coming up there, but who is behind them? Why have they come? Because that is one of the techniques that the ISIS uses.
If I interpret you correctly, when you say it's manageable, you're also saying, but if you don't handle it properly, it will become unmanageable.
Precisely.
So the potential to become unmanageable is there. It all depends upon how you tackle it today.
Yes.
Which means today, action is of the essence.
It is.
And if you don't act today, then you may have made a manageable situation unmanageable for the future.
I agree with you.
All right, that's a very clear note on which to end, even if it's a somewhat sobering note. My thanks to you for coming to studio. My thanks also to my other guests for joining us. We have a you want a quick word? Yes, go ahead, Naresh. A very quick word. Go ahead, Naresh, 10 seconds.
Yes, I just want to say, I never said that I'm for Muslim reservation. I said reservation should be based on economic criteria.
Absolutely. And I don't think anyone meant to misunderstand you, even if perhaps by so speaking they did. It was quite clear that you were saying when it's on economic criteria, it will be available to Muslims as well, whereas at the moment it's not. And the point you were making is that you need to find a way of making it available because they need it perhaps more than anyone else. My thanks to all my guests for joining me. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye.